Top of the morning to you, and welcome to our weekend edition of the special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. U.S. defense aid package to Ukraine dismisses Russian claims about uranium risks. NATO says there's no indication of intentional Russian attack on Romania. Plus, Ukraine says it has started exporting grain through Croatian seaports. The United States Defense Department is pushing back against Russian claims that the depleted uranium rounds the U.S. announced is sending to Ukraine will cause an increase in cancer and other diseases. The new U.S. military assistance package was announced by U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken while he was in Kyiv. For the first time, depleted uranium munitions are part of the aid.
The World Health Organization reports that I would push back on the assertion from Russian officials. Here, the CDC has stated that there is no evidence that the depleted uranium rounds cause cancer. The World Health Organization reports that there's been no increase of leukemia or other cancers and that have been established following any exposure to uranium or DU. And even the IAEA has stated unequivocally that there is no proven link between DU exposure and increases in cancers or significant health or environmental impacts. So I would push back on that. In terms of your second question, these are anti-tank rounds. They're meant to pierce tanks, and they're meant to be used. They will be used very effectively on the battlefield. These are standard issue rounds. These are what these Abrams tanks will use, and many militaries across the world use depleted uranium in their tanks. So we feel that these will be the most effective rounds to counter Russian tanks, and will help will help the Ukrainians to defend the battlefield, to defend their territory. So I would let the...
A hole in the ground and damaged trees were observed at the alleged site of a Russian crashed drone in Romania. Confirmation that the parts found in Romania this week belong to a Russian drone could constitute a serious violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Romania and the Allies. Foreign ministers from Nordic and Baltic countries gathered in Riga on Thursday to discuss cooperation and support for Ukraine. Sweden's Foreign Minister Tobias Billström said the training of Ukrainian F-16 fighter jets has started. Pilots, that is, the training of their pilots. Finland's Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen gave the assurance that her country will offer unwavering support.
I'm very pleased that training of fighter pilots is now underway. Evaluation needs to be done, of course, from both sides after the completed training. And Sweden is also part of the F-16 coalition in defense of Ukrainian airspace.
And a few of those that we have discussed is Ukrainian integration to NATO, their acceptance to NATO, their integration into EU, and their path towards EU, the question of accountability, which still has not been decided and set, and the rebuilding of Ukraine. All of those require our attention, and I'm sure that they will be also those victories that Ukraine will be able to achieve. And we are determined to stay with Ukraine until its victory. Thank you.
The family as a new foreign minister. That happened here in Riga in November 20. For Norway, our parliament, with the support of all political parties, have committed to a 5-year program to support Ukraine. We have pledged about 1.3 billion euro a year for 5 years. We are committed to supporting Ukraine for the long term. Furthermore, Prime Minister Sturr in Kyiv in August announced that Norway plans to donate F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. So Nordic-Baltic cooperation has never been stronger, never been more important or more valuable than now.
Finland will continue to support Ukraine with defense material and with all possible levels of aid as we have. So far we have committed 18 defense material packages amounting to 1.3 billion euros. In total, our aid amounts to 1.8 billion euros. Finland's unwavering support continues for as long as it's needed.
Meanwhile, the United Nations is actively engaged in trying to improve Russia's grain and fertilizer exports in a bid to convince Moscow to again allow the safe Black Sea export of Ukraine grain. That's according to the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who's been sent what he calls a set of concrete proposals aimed at reviving the Black Sea grain deal. Russia quit the deal in July, a year after it was brokered by the United Nations and Turkey. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will discuss the progress towards circumventing Russia's Black Sea grain blockade with G20 leaders at the summit this weekend. He indicated this after a call with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. According to Sunak's spokesperson, they discussed the impact of President Putin's continued Black Sea grain blockade. The Prime Minister committed to ensuring vulnerable countries can access vital grain shipments. Meanwhile, a top Ukrainian says the country has already started shipping grain through Croatian seaports. Ukraine has been exploring alternative shipping routes after Russia pulled out of the deal in July that allowed Ukrainian ships to navigate safe passage through the Black Sea to Turkey's Bosphorus Strait in order to reach global markets. Ukraine's economy minister, Yulia Sviridenko, reasoned that after all, Russia continues to launch missile strikes on the grain infrastructure on the Black Sea coast, which significantly limits the possibilities of domestic grain exports. Earlier this month, Russian forces attacked Ukrainian port facilities in the Danube River used for food exports. Now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has assured Bangladesh that Moscow is committed to completing a nuclear power project on time, despite obstacles resulting from Western sanctions over the war in Ukraine. Mr. Lavrov, the first Russian foreign minister to visit Bangladesh since its independence in 1971, got to Dhaka for a two-day visit after attending the East Asia Summit in Jakarta. Bangladesh's Foreign Minister Ak Abdul Momin took up the issue of timely completion of the nuclear power project and bilateral trade issues with Mr. Lavrov, who also offered the export of liquefied natural gas, LNG, to meet Dhaka's energy needs. Mr. Lavrov says delivery and charging of the first nuclear fuel is expected as early as October. Bangladesh is building the first of two nuclear power plants in collaboration with Russian state-owned atomic company Rosatom in a $12.65 billion project, 90% of which is financed through a Russian loan repayable within 28 years with a 10-year grace period. Now we speak with former lecturer, diplomatic and consular relations law, Nasarawa State University, Kefi, Barrister Chukwuemeka Eze, who is in our Abuja studios. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Olumide.
Thank you for being with us. If you look at the trajectory of this war since it started up till now, we see an ongoing story that is told by the types of weapons that have been used. We can say that conventional weapons were used in the beginning, and then we heard about talk of the drones, and the drones came into play. The Scalp missiles came into play. The Storm Shadow missiles came into play. It began to be scarier when the talk of cluster munitions came into play, which was been banned by over 100 nations, supplied by the United States. Now, we also have the United States to thank for these munitions, these uranium-depleted munitions, which they are going to supply Ukraine again with. Are you concerned?
Yes, I'm not really concerned because the International Atomic Energy Agency has said that depleted uranium munitions are not so dangerous. But Russia has cried out. I'm aware the Russian embassy in the United States has cried out that these munitions have long-term effect on a person's esophagus, kidney, liver, and they have deleterious effects. So, but one thing is clear, that that kind of munition for the United States to take so long before supplying it, it means it is progressing from the least dangerous to the most dangerous. This is not the most dangerous, but we are getting there. And these munitions will be used in Abrams tanks to be supplied by the United States of America. So, but they have upped the ante, and Russia is getting ready its Ru-28 smart intercontinental ballistic missiles, which is nuclear-powered for purpose of launching higher attacks. So I'm concerned that the war, instead of ending or getting towards the end, then we are seeing it spiking up. So since we've gotten to depleted uranium munitions, who knows, one of these days we might be getting to actual use of uranium. And we know the radioactive effect of usage of uranium munitions. So basically, I'm concerned, but the statesmen of the world should speak up and bring this war to an end. If not, one day, who knows, Russia might be pushed to the wall to begin to use some of its nuclear-powered weapons. And that will be au revoir to humanity, because that will amount to genocide. There will be genocide if such things are used. Remember, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they remain ever in our memories. And because of what happened there, the United Nations, when it was formed in 1945, started with the subrequest of never again. Here we are. We never experienced another world war.
Indeed.
I'm really concerned.
Yes, it's cause for concern. May we say au revoir to the war as well, and bienvenido to peace. But that means, Barrister Eze, you are buying what the United States State Department is selling, saying that these uranium-depleted munitions cannot cause cancer, according to a research, according to that official from the U.S. Defense Department, quoting the World Health Organization. But this runs counter to studies, epidemiological studies, after the Gulf War in 1991, because they used these uranium-depleted munitions then. And it was found that it was possible that the Iraqi mortality rate, which increased after these weapons were used over the years, was as a result of these weapons. Case in point number one. Case in point number two is that they are the byproduct of uranium enrichment for making making nuclear gas, nuclear fuel, and nuclear weapons. And that they lodge in the liver, in the kidneys, in the heart, and may cause renal failure. This is over years after the the weapons have been used in those specific areas. So why is the United States being so lackadaisical about all the studies that have come to light concerning the use of uranium-depleted munitions?
Yes, my position is that there is nothing about uranium that is less dangerous. Everything about uranium, call it depleted or non-depleted, everything about uranium is dangerous because of its radioactive nature. Yes, you've cited the epidemiological studies conducted in that regard. Certainly, depleted uranium munitions will cause serious havoc. But I think it is a signal to Russia to begin to wind down on the war, because if not, some of the weapons that they have used to overwhelm Ukraine, they might get something at the same measure or greater measure. Recall that at the beginning, the F-16s were not released. Ukraine called for them, and the countries, especially the United States, refused to give authorization for its supply, and they continue to watch the war. So it seems the war is in stages. We have seen the chain initiation. What we are experiencing now is the chain propagation, and nobody knows when we have the chain termination. But certainly, usage of the weapons, the gradual, the evolution of usage of dangerous weapons in the war will leave many people between Ukraine and Russia deformed at the end of the day. If these weapons are all used in this war, generations to come will have people that will be deformed. We will have people that will continue to suffer radioactive effects, and especially what is happening in Japan, has been happening in Japan over the years. We have recurrence in Ukraine or Ukraine-Russia. So it is quite, benumbing that the world has watched Ukraine and Russia to continue to test most of the weapons that have been produced in the various countries, especially now that North Korea has been reported to be talking with Russia to supply them weapons, especially artillery weapons and others. So if we take it to that level, basically, when North Korea comes into the mix, plus China has not overtly supplied weapons, but there are reports that there might be secret supplies. But by the time North Korea, China, and Russia stay on one side and supply weapons, you'll be experiencing a reoccurrence of what happened during the Korean War between 1950 and 1953, which ended in the armistice in the Korean Peninsula. So I wouldn't want this war to be taken to that level, where there will be congregation of opposing forces for the purpose of using dangerous weapons. And in any case, the war is being fought at several fronts. Beyond the weapons being used, the Olympics is going to be affected by the war. Ukraine says it will not attend if Russia attends, and Emmanuel Macron said that he doesn't expect to see Russia in Paris for the Olympics that will take place next year, and that they will make arrangements for those who are falling victim. Athletes that have been preparing over the years to find a way to attend, but not necessarily hoisting the Russian flag in Paris next year. So everything is taking the hit, not just the type of weapons we are talking about. Israel has just signed an agreement with Russia to promote to collaborate and promote films internationally, and Ukraine is crying foul that Israel has not done the right thing. So everywhere, every portion of the globe is feeling Ukraine.
Indeed.
The BRICS, and we have, from your display this morning. I have seen the Nordic and Baltic countries. Remember, the Baltic countries first met in Greece. Now they have come together with the Nordic countries, making a lot of pledges. And who knows, from there, the whole European Union might be involved. Europe has always been the sick man of the world. They brought about the First World War. They brought about the Second World War. And they are leading us to the Third World War. Europe should rethink. Russia and Ukraine war should be stopped. We cannot continue this way so as not to have another opportunity to say never again.
Indeed, and the Russian and Belarusian athletes, this is a nightmare for them, especially for the career athletes who make a living from using their bodies in this way to entertain the world and to compete on the international stage. If you're looking at the tennis tournaments, if you're looking at the Olympics, as you just cited, it's really a problem. But if you had the ear of President Putin, would you advise him to virtually attend the G20 summit in New Delhi in India as he did the BRICS summit in South Africa? Because it's going to be a no-show. And it's going to be Sergei Lavrov in person at that venue. It's been said that, well, maybe India and Russia are heading towards some sort of split in their relations. What's your opinion of how much of an influence the G20 summit can have on this war in Ukraine?
Yes, the G20 being the 20 most industrialized countries in the world, they have a voice, and they have, over the years, shaped the ideas of many things that have come to fruition. So G20 cannot be ignored. But as for India trying to, having issue with Russia, I don't think so. India has decided to remain non-aligned. I don't think they will have any issue with Russia. But for Vladimir Putin not attending the G20, I think it is in his best interest not to attend, because if he attends and he meets, remember that Xi Jinping will likely not be at the G20. So the premier will be there for China. So who will Putin, among the top superpowers, who will he be conferring with? He wouldn't be comfortable conferring with the US President Biden, who actually is interested to see him and speak with him, and who I think will be joining Kamala Harris for the G20 summit in India. But let's get what concerns Ukraine. What concerns Ukraine is to have a statement released by the G20 touching on the Russian-Ukraine war. Even in the absence of Putin, Lavrov is sufficient to handle the situation. Remember, China and Russia are together in agreement that no statement will be issued from that perspective by the G20. And remember, G20 acts by consensus. So if the two says no, we are not going to be parties to any statement that will be pro-Ukraine. Definitely, G20 will not issue a statement. But the presidency of G20, that's India, might issue a statement, but it will not have the same force as a statement issued by the leaders of the 20 countries. So I think at the end of the day, there will not be an agreement.
You should mention that because, sorry to interrupt you.
Stated in advance that they will not compromise.
Sorry to interrupt you. There is going to be a statement allowed by India for Russia's position to be acknowledged during the G20 summit, Russia and Ukraine. So it's going to be, it's respect, I think, for, and also the position which you have alluded to, of India being on good terms with Ukraine, with Russia, I beg your pardon, but that this forum will allow for the Russian point of view to be established on this stage.
Yes, definitely India is not interested to ruffle feathers, but one thing is clear. If at the end of the day, there is no statement issued by the G20 leaders, many analysts would have seen the summit in India as a failure, because it is usual for them to have a coordinated statement issued in the name of the leaders, agreed by consensus by all the leaders. So whatever position or whatever statement India issues at the end of the day, and it issues it only from the point of being the president, occupying the presidency of the G20, will be seen as not having that force and will not be seen as the overall position of the G20. The challenge there is to have a statement by consensus by all the leaders, all the participants, all the 20 countries. And this will be a tough one. I think India has been trying to overcome this, but if that statement fails to be direct or specific on the havoc of the war in Ukraine, the United States will not accept it. Not just the United States. The European partners of the US will not accept it. And if it is pro-Ukraine, Russia and China will not accept it. So I foresee a situation that they will have a non-compromisable situation, and at the end of the day, there might not be a statement. So India is trying to do something, but I doubt whether they will be able to overcome this scenario.
Indeed.
And analysts will, at the end of the day, look at Narendra Modi as having not been able to cement the divide between these two opposing forces, Russia, China on one hand, and United States and the other East European partners on the other hand. So at the end of the day,
Ukraine will be screaming. Yes, we'll see how it plays out. Ukraine will be screaming blue murder if there is any, if there's no unitary submission from the entire G20 that favors Ukraine, and obviously Russia are of a different mind. Thank you for being a part of the program and for your insight this morning, Barrister Chukwuemeka Eze, who is a former lecturer, diplomatic and consular law at the Nasarawa State University, Kefi. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Olumide. I'm grateful.
Welcome to the Soul for More stretch of today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. And as Ukraine braces up for a second winter of assault drones and missiles pummeling its critical infrastructure, it hopes that its air defense crews, bolstered with new Western systems, can stop the country from being plunged into darkness. The threat of Russian strikes on Ukraine's power grid is now even more acute, as Moscow has set up its own facilities to manufacture assault drones based on the Iranian Shahed 136. Nearly half of Ukraine's energy system was damaged by Russian strikes last winter, when Moscow fired hundreds of Shahed drones alongside faster and heavier cruise missiles to hit power plants and transformers. Kyiv now has a bolstered lineup of air defenses, including newly donated German-made Leopard flak guns, that is Jeopard flak guns, a sleek green turret mounted onto the chassis of a battle tank. Each Jeopard radar has an effective radius of 12 kilometers, meaning Ukraine does not have enough of them to cover its vast territory. Large caliber machine guns, such as the US-made M2 Browning, are deployed to fill the gap. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has said it'll be a huge mistake for North Korea to exchange military support with Russia for use in its war against Ukraine. Mrs. Harris, who is in Jakarta, Indonesia, for an ASEAN summit, was speaking in a broadcast, added that it'll be a sign of desperation for Russia to seek aid from the reclusive North Korea, and will further isolate both countries. U.S. officials have warned in recent days that arms negotiations between Russia and North Korea are actively advancing. North Korea's Kim Jong-un plans to travel to Russia this month reportedly to meet President Vladimir Putin and discuss supplying Moscow with weapons for its war effort. Ukraine's Human Rights Commissioner has called for more international pressure on Moscow to help Kyiv bring home thousands of Ukrainian children. Dmytro Lubinets spoke in Kyiv days after several minors were reunited with their parents in western Ukraine. The children journeyed home from Russia and Russian-held areas. The ICC have accused President Putin and Russia's Children's Rights Commissioner of illegally deporting hundreds of children from Ukraine. Moscow has repeatedly denied its forces have engaged in war crimes or forcibly taken Ukrainian children. It said it transported Ukrainian children to protect them from fighting on the ground for their own safety. According to Lubinets, Kyiv has identified and verified almost 20,000 who've subsequently been located. Now, joining us on the program is Major General Pat Akemvinga, military strategist, a former commander, 4th Mechanized Brigade, Benin City. Thank you for making out the time to be with us.
Thank you so much, Olumide.
You know the saying, as you make your bed, so you will lie in it. The Ukrainians have given the green light for use of these weapons that are controversial in nature because of their impact. The cluster munitions first, which was much debated, and now these uranium-depleted munitions. What is your perspective on the use of these weapons that have an impact that can be generational negatively against the Ukrainians on their own soil?
Thanks. Okay, so you see, Ukraine is fighting a war against an enemy that, by every statistic, every metric, is stronger than it. And if you have been following the war, and I believe you have, you will notice that Russia has also used a lot of things that otherwise wouldn't have been used in normal wars. And even targeting places that are normally off targets for combat in these kinds of war. So basically, Ukraine is trying to, without airplanes, without fighter jets, depending on supplies from outside, Ukraine is trying to just manage with whatever it can. So some rules are being discarded, so to speak. It's also worth noting that the depleted uranium munitions have been used by other nations too. America was using them. Britain uses them. So they are not new. So basically, Ukraine is making do with whatever they have to keep pace with the developments on the battlefield. So, yeah, rules appear to have been discarded for a while.
Will this be an effective military strategy further down the road? Because obviously the people of Ukraine themselves, who they are protecting, will be the victims in this regard. We understand that these uranium-depleted munitions, even though the United States State Department is singing a different tune, have long-term effects that will affect the Ukrainian people themselves. Should, for instance, they fight till next year and the war ends, or whenever the war ends, after its use, how will they begin to pick up the pieces?
I think that the Ukrainians just believe that you need to survive first and then handle the problems that come with surviving later. It's true that they are a little bit radioactive, and actually inhaling them can damage your kidneys. But for now, they feel it will bring an added advantage to the war effort. You will recall that they've been fighting a very difficult war, where moving from taking territories has been very difficult. They've just managed to breach through the defenses that the Russians constructed. It's been a tough grind. So basically, they are just shoving those problems that will come later on. They are just saying, let's do this war if we are able to get to a point where we can accept the outcomes. then they will deal with the fallout of using this kind of munitions later. Yeah, it's true that they are radioactive, and it's also true that cluster bombs will leave some traces on the ground to harm civilians later. But for now, Ukraine just wants to get on with the war, using whatever means possible. And like I said earlier, Russia too has not followed the rules, if we must be frank with ourselves. So Ukraine is doing what it can do to keep pace with the developments on the battlefield.
Major General, who, in your view, as the military strategist at this point, has the upper hand? Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, says that Ukraine, having breached the defensive lines of the Russians, are making remarkable headway, while the Russians are saying that the counteroffensive has failed in its entirety, regardless of whatever gains the Ukrainians have made.
Olumide, nothing has dramatically changed. I had signaled here before that this was going to be a long, difficult slog, and it's panning out that way. This war will not produce dramatic outcomes unless we introduce something dramatic. And that dramatic thing, I wouldn't even want to mention it. It's true that Ukraine has finally begun to make progress, and it was expected to be difficult because, you see, they had telegraphed long ago that they were going to do a counteroffensive. They gave the Russians enough room, enough time, enough space to create the kind of defenses that are difficult to breach. So they are finding it difficult to breach all of them. They've been able to scale through the first line, and they are saying the second line may be easier. But that does not mean that the war will dramatically change just because you have captured a little bit of territory. What they've captured is not too significant so far, but we must give them kudos for trying at all. Ukraine was not expected to be where they are now in this war. This war was designed to last for, at best, a week. For Ukraine to be holding on like this means that war has dramatically changed. With technologies, it means that the big powers can no longer have the dominance they used to have. So Ukraine is trying, but to give any of them an upper hand, yeah, if you look at it from the perspective of Russia, you are a superpower. You've gone with Ukraine toe-to-toe, head-to-head, and you've discovered that an enemy that you thought was so simple that it was calculated will end in 1 week, is still fighting you 1 year, 6 months down the line, inflicting casualties, making you to even begin to explore means of even getting Cuban fighters. Well, so if you look at it from that perspective and look at the grand strategy of the Americans and NATO to kind of weaken Russia using this war, to that extent you say, yeah, Russia is at a little bit of a disadvantage because he has been exposed to something that we didn't expect. His superpower status, why it still remains, has some slight question marks here and there. But like I've always signaled, Russia is a big power. It will use everything possible. Russia has oil, Russia has resources, Russia has a huge population. So Russia will keep fighting, Ukraine will keep fighting. But to indicate that any of them is having an upper hand right now would be a fallacy. It's not true.
Can I hazard a guess as to what you say will be the dramatic thing that will be turned to for a dramatic outcome for the war to end in a dramatic way? Are you speaking of nuclear weapons?
I have signaled that, well, yeah, you see, Russia.
You must tell us. You must tell us. You know why? You know why, Major General? You must tell us because
introduction of the.
Yes, I think you must tell us because that's why if the world sees the threats and the probabilities of the negative consequences, then maybe people will wake up from their slumber and see that there's more reason for mediation, there's more reason for armistice, there's more reason for treaties, there's more reason for this war to come to an end.
That's what I was saying. Russia has signaled that recently, just some few days back, that the introduction of the depleted uranium munitions was taking it into the nuclear phase. But it is also important to stress here once again that there will be no nuclear warfare. Nobody is foolish enough to engage in that. Does that rule out the introduction of tactical nuclear equipment? that are used at the tactical phases of battle. I will haphazard a guess that if we push Russia to a certain level, they could use that. And that alone can be dramatic. It can change the course of the war. But for now, it is safe to just hold it that they will not be introduced. Because nuclear weapons, by their very nature, are designed to serve as deterrents. They are designed to make sure that superpowers who possess them do not go to war. Because I had said before that will be mutually assured destruction. So, and if you are fighting a small nation like Ukraine, unless it gets to the level where you are being humiliated, and for now, Russia is not being humiliated. But if it gets to that level where you are being humiliated, you know, we have passed a couple of red lines that we thought would change the course of the battle. For instance, Ukraine is now hitting mainland Russia with drones, destroying strategic fighter planes on the ground, about 4 of them just last week. So you would have thought that, yeah, at that level, this would be introduced. But Russia is a reasonable player. Yeah, it may look like in war all things are allowed, but again, there are limitations on how battles can be conducted, warfare can be conducted. There are still some rules governing these things. So I don't think that it will get to that level. But Russia will keep fighting, Ukraine will keep fighting. And as long as Ukraine gets the support of the West, particularly the Americans, Ukraine will keep fighting. They are a proud people. They feel they've been provoked. They feel that the war was unjustified, that it shouldn't have happened at all. So yeah, just 2 days ago, a lady at that market that was destroyed was lamenting that the nation is being destroyed. There is pent-up anger, there is bitterness, and it will continue like that.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Major General. That human element of pride or ego, once in play, is very hard to get around it. We hope that they do. Thank you so much for making out the time to be with us, for your insights and your contribution this morning, Major General Pat Akemvinga, military strategist and former commander, 4th Mechanized Brigade, Benin City. Welcome to the final stretch of today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Greenpeace activists in rubber dinghies staged an early morning protest on the German resort island of Rügen on Thursday to demand that the construction of a planned liquefied natural gas terminal be halted. The activists painted "No New Gas" in large letters onto the side of a ship moored at the Mukran port close to the planned site off the Baltic Sea coast. Greenpeace energy expert Carsten Smid said it was time to be free from dependence on fossil gas and that the terminal will be detrimental to Germany's climate protection goal. Germany has fast-tracked building LNG terminals as it looks to reduce its reliance on piped Russian gas supply. Ini John Mekwa, Channel Television business correspondent, joins us now for the business dimension of the Russian war in Ukraine. Before we go to that, Greenpeace are known for that humanitarian ecosystem protection franchise that they do. Save the whales, save the sea. The ecosystem should be saved in Russia and Ukraine's case as well.
We've talked about the impact of the war on the environment and the natural habitation. Some time ago we talked about the island in Ukraine that has now been turned to a scene of war, instead of the peaceful paradise for tourists that it used to be. So another side effect of the war right there.
And that paradise is what maybe the G20 is set up for, the industrialized nations of the world, the top 20, to seek for a utopia for their personal countries, and then the group objectives for that organization. But now that the Ukraine war is center stage, do you think that it'll overshadow or overwhelm the G20 summit talks to take place in New Delhi?
I have to tell you, it's a major, it's a major distraction at this time, because when you look at the combination of the G20, you have major members of BRICS currently there. You even have some of the new members. Saudi Arabia, for instance, is also there in the G20. And you have Russia, you have China. And then, of course, you have the United States, you have Germany, you have those EU countries also there. So imagine the kind of conversation they can have, you know, as they prepare to start their talks, major talks this weekend. And then you have India there talking about the G20 presidency. And this is India that is still consuming a lot of oil from Russia. You know, we talked about how they bought a whole billion barrels of oil, you know, recently, just about less than a month ago. You know, so it's a major distraction for them. And they have major issues they're supposed to discuss: climate change, the issue of debt, emerging economies. Inflation is everywhere. You know, the war is a distraction in so many ways. And we do not know how they can get past it. Already it's forming, you know, it's building sentiments around what should have been a one-block conversation. And we know that Russia is not going to be there. Putin said he won't be there. I think China, Xi Jinping is sending a representative, you know, and it's all about the war. And these are the major people right there. So what is going to come out of it? And they have to make a declaration. If everybody is not on the same side, how do they make that declaration? So it's the G20 this weekend, but of course the war is still a major topic, even right there at the G20, before the G20, and, you know, afterwards.
You raised an interesting point that the BRICS summit countries, including the newly admitted, to be admitted ones, are going to be present.
Yes.
Do you think that in any way there will be more of a BRICS agenda for these countries that is in more of a BRICS interest than of a G20 interest? Because they were talking at the summit of BRICS of an alternative to the unipolar business and the dominance of certain countries.
Yeah, de-dollarization major right there.
Yes.
And so, you know that the Bank of China has now opened a branch in Saudi Arabia. So most likely there's going to be increase of yuan, the use of yuan there. And China buys a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia. You understand? So we are seeing more transactions with the yuan. So I don't know if they will be strong, as the BRICS members who are part of the G20 will be strong enough to bring the agenda of BRICS right there, because of course you have giants like the EU, you have the UK and the US, and they will not be quiet about anything like that.
If BRICS was serious, then that means that this will be an alternative to the G20.
Well, I don't know if there can be an alternative. BRICS has already said they're not coming to be an alternative to the West. They're not be an alternative to anything. But, I mean, that's what they say. But we don't know what is the undertone going there. I think it's going to be interesting times, you know, at this time. When you look at the membership of G20, the talks over the weekend, the agenda of those countries, and, of course, the sentiments around the war. I think it's going to be a very interesting weekend.
Indeed. Thank you, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
Ini John Mekwa. Now, finally, on the program, U.S. Secretary of State, before we go there, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on his new defense minister, Rustem Umerov, to reduce the red tape and increase trust. And the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, visited the positions of Ukrainian border guards in Kyiv region on his trip, accompanied by the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink. Mr. Blinken was shown personal protective equipment and military vehicles provided to Ukraine by the United States. The chief of Ukraine's border guard service, Serhiy Dineko, thanked the Secretary of State for the U.S. assistance, saying it helped to save the lives of many Ukrainian border guards. And that's it for today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine this weekend. Thank you for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Have a good day and a great weekend.